Can you hear me at the back there? Fantastic. What I'd like to talk about today is actually not so much my research in terms of things I might publish, but actions I've done which are relevant to open science, because open science is about action. And the theme will be transparency. Now, last 10 years or so, there's been a sense of a credibility crisis in various fields, but there's been psychologists have been most reflective about it. So I can speak for psychology in saying, although we always knew that that errors were made in science, that the scientific process and the outcomes are more error-prone and contain more errors than we could have imagined. And that gave a sense of credibility crisis, reproducibility crisis, replicability crisis, and so on. Now I want to summarize the problem by saying that the scientific system is insufficiently transparent to itself. And what do I mean by that? Several things. One is, and this we've known for decades, is that there's what was called a file drawer problem, that a lot of work was simply not published if it didn't get exciting results, if it got null results. So in that sense, the information contained in that scientific activity that was done is not available to the system. It was not transparent to the system, and that distorted the scientific record. Of the studies that were published, there was a problem that the predictions did not follow simply from the theories. In other words, there was a lack of transparency about what the theories actually predicted. An example of that would be, let's say you're developing a drug that is meant to reduce anxiety. And there's various measures you took which are relevant to anxiety reduction, but the paper either only reports one of those measures or only highlights one of those measures as the effect of the drug. When really the theory involved that the drug reduces anxiety could not be simply taken or plausibly taken to say it only affects this measure and not the other measures. And even for the measure or the outcome that is reported as having been established, the result having been established, that it supports that this outcome, measuring anxiety by this outcome is reduced by the drug. It may well be that data was massaged in getting there, because there's always a large number of ways you can analyze data. For example, what you do with outliers, how you transform data, which exact form of statistics you take, what we call p-hacking. And it may even be that for the very analytic protocol that was eventually decided, that doesn't actually produce the results that are reported in the paper. In other words, there's a factual error in terms of what the claimed analyses show. And then on top of all those problems of transparency, then the research, when it eventually is published, is published in a way that costs vast sums of money for the author to publish, can be $10,000 for Nature, and vast sums of money for readers to read, vast sums of money for institutions to pay for, and so the data isn't open anyway. So let's look at some of the solutions. One of the problems, and this is the way Chris Chambers nicely puts it, is this sort of the incentive structure on scientists. So a prestige journal, a big part of whether they accept a paper is how exciting were the results. But the results are the one thing that the author should not have control over, because they should reflect how nature actually is. But these are the one thing that must be absolutely fantastic. And this alone could lead to a lot of the problems I've just been talking about. So in 2013, Chris Chambers set up the idea of registered reports, which is, it's an idea that actually goes back some decades before, but in 2013, what Chris Chambers did was and he's been an unstoppable juggernaut to make this idea happen and to make it work. That what you do is, you get the paper accepted before the results are collected. So I was on the initial editorial board when this was first set up in 2013. This deals with the problem of a biased publication record, because then a prestigious journal is committing to publishing the paper before the data are in. Incidentally, when this was set up, you go back to the internet and look at comments, and people were saying this will never work, it will stifle creativity, science doesn't work this way. We'll see what happened. Another thing that happens in a registered report is before the data are in, the author and the reviewers and the editor determine what predictions follow from the data. So you're not biased about cherry-picking your predictions in the light of the data. You also nail down the inferential pathway from the data to the conclusions, so there's no statistical wiggle room left for you to play around and get the results you want afterwards. And that deals with the next two problems that I had listed there. So 2013, we set this up. I've been involved in registered reports ever since. There's now over 300 journals that use registered reports in all sciences and also humanities. So this has gone from some maverick idea to mainstream. The most prestigious journals do this now. So that's been a great success story. But it didn't solve all the problems. So one of the problems I talked about are these journals which charge like billions of pounds for scientists to submit their work, to do the writing, to review it, to do most of the editorial work, and then to read it. And what does the journal do? It just charges money for the privilege of putting it in the journal. What has been added? Nothing intellectually. And I discovered the guy who sold this process to academics recently. So hail Ralph Harrison, here seen doing his business selling refrigerators to Inuits. So part of my philosophy now for more than 2 years is that I don't author, edit, review for a journal run by any for-profit unless some of the money, at least some of the money, trickles back to society, so it's a society journal. So I spend a lot of my time doing editorial work. It's a lot of work. I just could not bring myself to do that for a for-profit, including places like Nature. I won't author or review. How can I do that? Well, I adopted this policy when I found there was a solution. And one solution out there is peer community in which you have editors, which are called recommenders, who do all the work. Preprints are put on a preprint server. The relevant peer community for that discipline is alerted by the author. We go through the editorial and review process until it's accepted or otherwise. That's the job of a journal that's already done, but it's all done for free. So it's the process is open, reviews are open, everything is open, and so it's free to authors and free for institutions. The running cost for running a platform like this is about €300 a year for each community. By community, I mean what you call a journal. That's for a year for a whole journal. Now compare that to subscription fees, which can be up, as I say, to $10,000 for a single article. So we're just being ripped off. Peer community was mentioned in the recent parliamentary report on scientific integrity as a possible way forward for science. So just over a couple of years ago, Karina Logan, Chris Chambers and myself set up the registered reports version of this. And this has taken off exponentially. I didn't know whether it would be a success. I mean, we're operating with preprint server. It doesn't have the prestige of the journals, but we're getting more and more submissions. We've dealt with 69 papers. That's probably slightly out of date now. In other words, with a protocol, stage one means a protocol is approved before the data are collected. 22 where the data is fully collected. Because we're getting more and more papers than we could handle, we recruited editors. We've got over 70 now, and the process is just growing. So why are we successful in doing that? Why are we challenging the publishing model? Well, it's because we're dealing with a preprint server. We haven't actually published anything, so people are free to then go to the normal journals which carry prestige. And we have 30 journals which are friendly to us, meaning they guarantee they'll publish any paper we have accepted without further peer review, so long as some small conditions are satisfied, such as the topic of the journal and any specific requirements that they have, which we in peer community judge whether they satisfied or not the journal. So then the prestige of the journals that we feed into rubs off on us. We steal back the prestige that we gave to them in the first place, and that's why it works. And that deals with the final point of transparency that I had. Now, there's some also institutional level actions I've been involved in. One problem that has been shown in the scientific record is the large number of errors in reproducing the results in the paper from the data those very results came from. So thanks to funding from the Research Culture Committee here at Sussex, we have a reproducibility statistician, Rennie Bakeover, who for any paper a psychologist at Sussex has, they can give to her and she will check and correct and ensure the reproducibility of any paper before it is submitted to a journal. So there's always errors, by the way, and so this removes errors from the scientific record, errors that are almost always there in any paper. I think this idea is sort of so obvious that although we're the first to implement it, I would imagine it takes off in universities nationally and internationally. And that deals with this point here, to make sure the results really do follow from the data. Now, there's one other issue of transparency I want to mention, for which no action has yet been taken, and that is that science is the essence of science is transparency, in the sense that it's an open democratic process of sharing critical arguments where anybody can chip in to this open process to make their arguments, and there's no system of authority. It's not that someone in authority can say this is the way it is. Once you've become part of the scientific community, you're of equal authority. So as I tell my students, I have no authority. Just I think I've seen some things. And when I point to you where to look, you can judge what you think you see when you look there, and then the question of my authority is irrelevant. So that science is one of our greatest achievements, and there's a particular decision-making process of judgment that goes on there, which is open democracy. Now, if you look at the historical development of science, I think science works best when it's embedded in a culture which works by the same principles. So one thing I've argued is that science should be embedded in an institution and a culture which works by open democratic processes. If you consider an institution like Sussex, just as when you're trying to solve a scientific problem, and any given individual might have relevant information to a problem, you just don't know. In an institution, each individual in an institution has relevant knowledge about and possibly unique knowledge about how the institution is working. So the question is, how do you integrate information? Because science is a process of globally integrating information in order to make the decision. But how do you do that in an institution, making institutional level decisions? Well, consider the process of open democracy, say a citizens' assembly. You randomly select from the community of citizens. Consider an institutional level decision like the VCs wondering about should be a faculty level structure. Imagine instead of senior management simply making that decision, we set up a citizens' assembly where people were randomly selected from all corners of the university. They debated, giving information packs, and were allowed to ask experts. And the VC says, I trust the ability of the citizens to make decisions. And by randomly selecting, you're bringing in diverse viewpoints. And diverse viewpoints always help decision-making. And imagine the trust that the VC will gain by trusting the people in making important decisions. So I laid out how this sort of open democratic process could apply more generally in the process of recirculating people around in decision-making institutions. And what this does, open democracy does, is it makes the institution transparent to itself. And I know of no other process that can really do this, that maximally integrates information in a way that information is actually being used from all corners of the university, just as is the process of science when it's working ideally. So, in summary, I started by saying that science has problems in not being transparent to itself. And I said, Sussex has been a part of that. It's been part of the amazing success story of registered reports, which just shows how change can happen. In 10 years, an idea has gone from being regarded as a bit mad to now being mainstream. I showed how Sussex has been part of the success story of reform in publishing, for example, the peer community that's an incipient success story. Seems to me that this sort of activity could completely change the scientific publishing landscape, and that's my aim in the end, is to destroy publishing as we know it now. We might get there. But this seems to be the chink in the armor that PCI attacks in the publishing model. And another possible success story is the use of reproducibility statisticians, which we've just started piloting. The reproducibility statistician has been well used. That seems to be a success. That could take off and would be fantastic for science if this became a general process. And then something that hasn't happened, will Sussex become a beacon of open democracy? Well, will it? I don't know. Thank you.